So that is the introduction. So when he gets to Kitab al-Ilm, I mean, the first thing that he's saying, there's two types of knowledge. There's knowledge of the inward and the outward. And then there's blameworthy and praiseworthy knowledge. So for instance, magic is a knowledge, right? You can learn magic. Astrology is a type of knowledge. Because knowledge is anything that can be taught. That's the definition in our religion of knowledge. It's anything that can be conveyed or taught. If it can't be taught or conveyed, it's not knowledge. If you're not able to teach it, you're not an alim of that knowledge, of whatever that knowledge is. So if you learned grammar, but you can't teach it, then you're not really a scholar of grammar. You might speak well, but you're not a scholar. You have to be able to convey the knowledge. And so the great gift of the human being is nutq. This is the great gift. And that's why knowledge is communicated. Animals do not have this. That's why they're not called natiq. In Arabic, natiq means rational as well. Natiqun means rational, as well as a speaker. So natiq is someone who's speaker. But it also means rational because mantiq in Arabic is the word that was used for logic. Mantiq is logic. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahman 'allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, 'allamahu al-bayan. So this is mahal al-imtinan. Allah is yamunnu alayna. And Allah is al-Mannan. It's one of His names. He can remind us of His blessings. For a human to do that is considered madhmoom. But Allah, for Him to do it, it's mahmud. It's of His, because all His attributes are praiseworthy. So Allah reminds us that He gave us the gift of speaking. And that should engender gratitude, which means using your speech for what's beneficial. وَقُولُ لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. Speak good to people. مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. If you believe in Allah and the last day, speak well or be silent. Speak good, say good things, or be silent. Right? This is what the Prophet ﷺ told. He told us to use the gift of tongues, not to backbite, not to speak ill of people. And if you're warning about people, you speak in generalities. You don't speak specifically about individuals. The Prophet used to say, "Ma baru aqwam." What's wrong with people that do this and that? Right? Now, obviously, if they're completely deviant, then that's a different matter. So that's hikmah, to know the difference. So when you look at the gift of language, what is underlying this gift is the ability of understanding. Which is that we have fiqh, and he'll go into these terms, right? We can gain knowledge. So we have understanding. Allah has given the human being the ability to understand with the intellect. But the intellect by its nature has problems. One of the major problems of the intellect is that it's a triune intellect, right? You have three brains in your head. You have this R stem, you have a midbrain, and then you have this frontal lobe. In our tradition, and this is confirmed by science, even though they knew this a long time ago, the R stem is the amara. It's a reptilian brain. right? And most of the people in power are functioning like reptiles. That's why there's all these crazy theories about them being reptiles in reality and remove their masks and they're really lizard people and things like this. That is because they behave like reptiles. Now, I spent my summers on a cattle ranch when I was young, so I spent a lot of time with lizards. There were lizards all over the place. I used to watch them. They're very interesting creatures. The Arabs say, أحير من ضب, more confused than a lizard. And I understand what that means. Somebody can hear that, but if they don't know lizards, they won't know what that means. Because a lizard, when it comes out of its hole, it's like, it looks so confused, you know? But one of the things, lizards are always petrified. They're just in a state of fear. They're always afraid. And so the reptilian brain, at the root of it is fear. It's fear. But it has another quality, fear and desire. And so this is the shahwa, right? The quwwa shahwaniya. This is the concupiscible soul. It's the soul that desires food, desires sex, desires security, all these things. That's the nature of that soul. So it functions at that level, and that's why it's very primitive. And propagandists, advertising agencies, they understand this very well. And that's why they control the masses through social engineering by keeping them in this brain. This is where they keep the majority of human beings. They're in this brain. And it's a very low brain, but there's a reason why it's there. It's not a negative thing in and of itself. It's negative when it overrides the other brains. Imam Al-Ghazali called this the pig. He called this the pig soul, that its nature is like a pig. It just eats and eats. It'll eat its own young. That's what a pig does. A khanzir will eat its own offspring. And so in that way, if it's left to its own devices, it becomes destructive. The midbrain is the center of the emotions. And this is, in our tradition, called the quwwa al-ghadabiyya, the irascible soul. One of the things that, since we're in Mawlana Rumi's city, one of the things that Rumi said is the reason God prohibited alcohol, I mean, this is his hikmah. You can't really say other than, I mean, Allah said that it's harmful, but it says that shaitan wants to sow hatred amongst you. And so what Mawlana Rumi understood from that, he said the reason that Allah prohibited alcohol is because most people, if you remove the veneer on their intellects of rationalism, they become angry. And that's why drunks often become very belligerent. And so he said it's really veiling people from this aspect of themselves. Because if you haven't controlled yourself, if you haven't learned to control yourself, you have this anger in you. And that's why the Prophet, when the man said, Awsini ya Rasulullah, he said, La taghdab, don't get angry. Awsini, la taghdab, 3 times. Don't get angry, because this quwwa is very powerful. Now this quwwa is actually, it has a purpose. And its purpose is related to the nafs al-lawama, because its function is to get angry for the right things. It's to blame what's wrong. And so the irascible soul has a very important function. But the highest, and this one Imam Al-Ghazali called the dog. The dog. This is the dog soul. Because the dog is a guard. This is the guardian soul. It's a guard. And then the last one is the quwwa aqliya. It's the faculty of intelligence or intellect. Aqliya means intellectus, it means to read inside is one of the meanings. So it's an internal, it's something that happens inside of you that's related to the furqan. It's an intellectus. It's what is able to discern right from wrong, true from false. And that's why this part of the brain needs to rule these two. But what happens is this overrides this and this overrides this. And so you have the markub becomes the rakib. The beast becomes the rider. And the rider becomes the beast. Right? It gets flipped. And this is unfortunately where most people reside in these two lower dimensions. So there's pigs and dogs. There's just people that are consuming and not thinking about the consequences of their consumption. And then there's just angry people that usually aren't able to consume because the consumption is being withheld from them. And so they live in a state of resentment, envy, and anger towards the people that live in the pig state. A little harsh, but that's pretty much what it is. Because they quickly join that group when they get into better circumstances. So this one he called the sage or the Shaykh. And he said this one has to rule these two. Now, what's interesting, because this is similar to Aristotle's model, but Imam Al-Ghazali added a fourth, quwwah, here. So Aristotle has three, because Aristotle talks about this. Imam Al-Ghazali added, and this is Quranic also, because Aristotle said it, if it corresponds with reality, then it's truth. Doesn't matter who said it. So the Muslims weren't afraid to take from other traditions if it was useful. But this is in the Quran. This understanding is very clearly in the Quran. And it's in the Hadith. So if you look, knowledge is what is necessary. But knowledge is not enough, because you can know the truth and you don't follow it. So what was the dua of the Prophet? Allahumma arini al-haqqa haqqan warzuqni ittiba'a. Show me the truth as truth, because you can see the truth as falsehood and you can see falsehood as truth. Wa arini al-batila batila, and show me falsehood as falsehood, warzuqni ijtinaba, and give me the ability to avoid it. This is tawfiq. So knowledge is not enough. The knowledge has to be coupled with practice. We have to practice what we learn. And so, if you look, all of the Sharia, according to our scholars, all of the Sharia can be reduced to two fundamental principles. Anybody studied usul al-fiqh? What are they? Okay, those are the 5 or 6 universal. But what are the two? Izz ibn Abd Salam and other usuli scholars reduced everything down to 2 fundamental principles in Sharia. All of Sharia is to do 2 things. Yeah. Jalb al-maslaha. Jalb al-maslaha. ودر al-mafsada. So it's to accrue good or benefit and to avoid harm. Jalb al-maslaha is the accrual of good. Yajlibu al-maslaha. What's good for you. Wadar al-mafsada. And to avoid what's bad for you. Now the way that we do that is through these 2 powers in our soul. Because the shahwa desires good by its nature. And the quwwa ghadabiyya is there to protect us from harm. That's the purpose of quwwa ghadabiyya. It's to protect you from harm. That's why you get angry when you see wrongs done either to yourself or to others, and you want to change it. So you want to ward off the harm. The shahwa is to yashtahi, he desires what he deems good. Now the problem is, if you don't have the arbitrator of the aql, If you don't have this arbitrator, then you're in trouble. Because أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, don't you use your brains? The aql, you have to have the aql. The aql is developed. It's not something we're born with it in development. It takes time. It develops physiologically, but it also develops spiritually. It develops intellectually. So in physiology, how does it develop? Intellect. How does it develop physiologically? Huh? Okay, myelination, all these things, but how is that done? What's the operative, what's necessary for that to happen? What's that? Nourishment, right? Yeah, you have to eat the right foods. We know now that kids that lick lead, right, they get neurological problems. We know that kids that have malnutrition have lower intellectual abilities because they weren't nurtured. You have to nurture your intellect. You also have to nurture it intellectually. The intellect needs intellectual nourishment. Garbage in, garbage out. If you read Pulp Fiction, it's mush for your brain. It's junk food for your brain, intellectually. If you waste your time reading empty things, right, then you're stunting your intellectual growth. But it also needs spiritual nourishment. You have to give it spiritual nourishment through prayer, through dhikr. This is how, because the intellect, the aql, is another word for ruh. They're all related. The sir, the qalb, the ruh, the fu'ad, these are all mutaradifat, according to the scholars. These are all synonyms for the same thing. The aql is the ruh when it moves towards intelligibles. So you call it aql when it's looking at the intelligibles, things that are known, either palpably or known intellectually, abstractly. Like we know, if I see a cow, I know the cow. My intellect understands that's a cow. If you talk to me about liberty, my intellect understands that as an abstraction, because you can't particularize liberty. You can show examples of freedom, but you can't show freedom. Nobody can point and say that's freedom, because it'll always be a particular of freedom. So the intellect can understand universals. Now, what Imam Al-Ghazali, and this is the fourth thing that he added, what he said was, this was not enough to control these two. You had to have a fourth faculty, and that faculty he called adlun. It's the faculty of balance. Because he said the intellect could go to extremes. And these quwwas can definitely go to extremes. And so he said each one of these three needs to have adala. And that is the operative mechanism within the soul that enables people to function healthfully, intelligently, rationally, spiritually, spiritual well-being. All these things come from balance. كَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a balanced ummah. The wasatiyya is here. That's where the balance is. Because what's in here, if this is balanced, the behavior will be balanced. If this is imbalanced, the behavior will be imbalanced. And so he said you had to have this balance, and this is acquired through learning and through discipline and through riyada, and it takes a long time. Most of us are given a lifetime to do this. Ibn al-Munkadir, who was the teacher of Imam Malik, said, I fought my soul for 50 years, jahadtu nafsi 50 sana hatta istaqamat li, until it was finally upright for me. That's Malik's teacher in Medina, who was one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islam. He's one of Imam al-Bukhari's men. Ibn al-Munkadir said, I fought my soul, mujahada, 50 years before I got it under control. People, this is all ajala. This is hard work, but you have to be consistent, just like exercising. You have to exercise. You have to do it every day or you fall apart, right? Really. You have to eat right. You can't just eat right sometimes. You have to eat right consistently if you want to be healthy. And this you have to have balance. And so this is how it's done. Now with these, the quwwah, these two quwwah, they have virtues. The shahwa, or this concupiscible soul, it's the highest virtue of it is love, right? And then it has the virtue of joy, farah and hub, right? And then it also has this fear, desire. So these are the three qualities. Now, when it's under the control of balance through the intellect and the will, through the aql and the irada, when it's under the control, then this quwwa shahwaniyah, it loves the good for its own sake. It loves good for its own sake. It has joy when it obtains the good. That's why للصائم فرحتان فرحة حينما يفطر. It's the farha it's the joy of obtaining the good, right? So it has this joy. And then it has desire when the good is absent. And this leads to himma. So when the good is absent, it desires to get what's good. Now what happens is the intellect decides what's real goods. See, the aql is what tells you what are the real goods, what's really good for you. The Prophet ﷺ said, حُفَّتَ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ. Paradise was surrounded by dislikeful things that aren't pleasant. See, the aql, what does the aql tell you? It tells you the cheesecake's bad for you, right? That's what it tells you. The aql tells you that. It says you don't want to eat that. Empty calories. You're going to get sick, rot your teeth, right? But the shahwa tells you, no, I love that. That's good. Oh, I'm going to have such joy when I eat it. Oh, I don't have it yet, but I desire it. See, that's what it's doing. That's what the nafs is doing. The aql says, okay, every once in a while, I'll reward you for being a good nafs. Right? So maybe on the Eid, I'll have a piece of cheesecake. Right? But the intellect, this is the rule of the intellect. And so this is important because if the aql is absent in the decision-making process, then what happens is the nafs chooses apparent goods. It chooses pleasure. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, حُفَّتَ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. This is going to take you to hell. حُفَّتَ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. Drugs, right? People love to feel happy. Drugs make people feel happy. You shouldn't know that. But people like drugs. It makes them feel happy. So they go after them, they obtain the goods, they feel joy. When it's absent, they feel desire. So they become addicted, right? That's because drugs are an apparent good to the nafs. It looks like it's a good thing. It's going to help me deal with my troubles, just have a highball, loosen up, got so much stress at work, right? This is the nafs speaking. But the aql says, khamar, it's bad. al-khaba'ith, right? So, عَسَى أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. Maybe you love a thing, your nafs loves it, it's an apparent good, but it's evil for you. وَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. And maybe you dislike a thing, but it's good for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah knows, so listen to what I'm saying. With your aql, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? I'm giving you good advice. The aql knows. if you listen with your fitrah, then you'll know you're right. It's not good for me. Khamr is not good. But a little bit of it is good in moderation. Allah says there's benefit in it. But the sinfulness, the harm is worse. Maslaha wa mafsada. That's tarjih. Which one? And that's where the aql says, I'd rather give up my moderate drinking, right, and prohibit alcohol if it's going to mean that people out there won't get addicted and won't suffer who can't be moderate with it, right? So that's a whole other way of thinking about this. So that's the quwwa shahwaniyah. Now, it has another aspect, which is aversion, because it also has dar'ul mafsada. And there, it has hatred, right? Because the hatred is, and then it has pain or sorrow. And then it has fear. The hatred is of evil in and of itself, right? But it could also hate what is an apparent evil. عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم. So حفت الجنة بالمكاره. So you can't let it choose. The aql has to choose because it will hate the wrong thing. It will hate apparent evils, like exercising, because it's tiresome. I'd rather just lie down, right? Praying, fasting. Why do they have to fast? You're just depriving yourself. People, you see people live in the West. People are you're not eating, not even drinking. Wow, that's so hard. Well, one, it teaches you discipline. Two, it's good for you, and they've proven this now. Temporary periods of caloric withdrawal is actually a really positive thing for the body. Sumu tasihhu, it's a hadith. Fast and get well. So it's good for you, even though it's difficult. So that's what we're being told. And then pain and sorrow is when it obtains the evil. So when it obtains it, it has pain, it has sorrow. This is the quwwa ghadabiyya. And then fear, it's the absence of evil, but it's thinking about it. This is the khawf. Now what Allah says, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They don't have khawf and huzn, because they're not operating from this. This is people that are operating from this nafs. They're filled with fear and depression. Depression for things. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi, min al-khawfi wal-huzn. I seek refuge in you from fear of things to come that haven't happened. That's what Ibn al-Qayyim says. And huzn from things that I've experienced, negative things. So the Prophet sought refuge from allowing the quwwa ghadabiyya, this soul, to determine in you these problems. So the quwwa al-aqliyya, and then avoiding harm, is muqaddam. You should avoid harm before you accrue good, right? So if you're in a situation, avoiding harm, like you want to get something in the middle of the road, and there's a Mack truck coming down the road, you don't go for the maslaha, right? You go for the dar'ul mafsada. So that's why it's very important to be aware of what's harmful for you. And that's hikmah again, because the intellect now, Imam Al-Ghazali, following the methodology of previous scholars, Imam Al-Ghazali says that there are fada'il to the intellect. The intellect has speculative virtues and it has practical virtues. There's 5. And the first is understanding. And this is the ability to perceive things, essences. It's the ability, humans have understanding because when they see something, They're able to see it. This was what Adam alayhi salam had. Allah preferred him over all of creation because of this gift. When he aradahum ala al-malaika, right? He showed the angels all the names. In other words, Fakhruddin al-Razi said it was that he could see the mahiyya. He understood the essences of things. He could universalize. And this is called abstraction. The angels don't abstract. The angels have immediate intuitive knowledge. They don't abstract. They're programmed. So it's like a computer has a programming. يَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. They do what they're programmed to do. Humans are not. Humans are actually willful creatures that are able to judge, to calculate. They have these gifts that enable them to make demonstrative proofs for things, enable them to abstract reality. And the ability to do that is extremely important. I think the time's up. So, does anybody have any questions about any of this? Clarifications? Is it advisable to have Shaykh to study the book of Imam Al-Ghazali, or are we able to do it on our own? Unfortunately, there's no really good translations of the whole Ihya. There's some reasonable translations of Nabih Faris has a translation which I've read of the Kitab al-Ilm, and it's got egregious mistakes. He was a Christian, I think from Iraq. He made really big mistakes in the book. So you cannot read that book without coming away with misunderstandings. He calls it Ilm al-Mukashafa revelation, which it's not. It's unveilings. Anyway, and many other mistakes in there. Dr. Abdul Hakim Winter translated the Breaking the Two. It's a good translation. And there's other books. The Book of Death has been translated. The Book 20 has been translated. There are several books, and they're useful. He's not a difficult writer. I mean, a lot of that introduction is a little difficult because it was the tradition of the Arabs to start their books with very complex language for the first 3 or 4 pages. It's called dibaja. It's kind of to weed out people because you start the book and you realize this is way over my head. So if you can read the first 3 pages in Arabic without having to try to figure out what they all mean, then you can probably read the book pretty well. But if you have a real hard time with the first few pages, then you probably shouldn't be reading the book yet. Traditionally, the book was studied with scholars. I had the blessing of studying it early on with a master of the book who pretty much memorized the whole book. Shaykh Ali Belfaqih, who was in the Emirates. He was exiled by the communists, and then he got kicked out of Saudi Arabia. He was a very strong, he used to get up in Medina, and he would just berate for all the bid'ahs that he saw, and it really troubled him, just the states of Muslims. But he lost his eyesight eventually, and I think Allah just did that to ease his pain, so he didn't have to see all the munkarat. Because he just really, I was once with him in the Central Mosque, and somebody was doing one of those, trying to get their feet next to, and he got up after and he gave this really amazing talk about how that has nothing to do with the Sunnah, and the hadith is from Bashir ibn Nu'man ibn Bashir in Al-Bukhari, that they were children. He was like 8 years old, and he said, we used to put our feet like this, and he's, Ibn Hajar says, if you do that now, people will get upset. In other words, it's not, Ibn Hajar, if it was Sunnah, he would have said, we should do this. But he said, don't do this. It was something, the kids were in the back, and they were worried about not, letting shaitan come between them. So they did that, right? Because the Prophet used to put the children in the back. And he explained that. He said, that's not the Sunnah, or it would be in the books of fiqh to do that. The Sunnah is to have shoulder to shoulder. But that thing, you see people sometimes like this, seriously. And he said, we're not wrestlers. He said, you're in a prayer, you should have khushu', not worried about your feet, worry about your heart. He used to finish sentences. He knew the book really well. Ithaf as-Sada. Zabidi wrote a commentary on the Ihya. Well, this is a good question because I think in the Catholic tradition, I think they do. But Fakhruddin al-Razi would indicate that they don't have that knowledge, and that was the knowledge that Adam surpassed them with, according to Fakhruddin al-Razi. That's what they couldn't abstract like that, because he could see the universal. Now, seeing the universal is very important, because what is the universal, essentially? You have the particulars, and then you have the universal. What's the universal? What does universal mean? Huh? It means one out of many. So what seeing the universal is seeing the oneness in the diversity. So if you say cup, this is a particular glass, right? Everybody can see it. That's called a perception. If I turn away and say I have a glass in my hand, or I put it down, now I have the concept. The concept is in the mind. The percept is tangible. It's perceived by the senses. The concept is perceived by the internal senses, because you have 5 external senses, you have 4 internal senses. And the internal sense that primarily perceives it is the hiss al-mushtarak, which is common sense. It's able to put it all together and realize it's a glass. And then you have what's called the quwwa al-khayala, or the mutkhayyala, which is the imagination, which enables you to imagine the thing in your mind. Imago, to put the image in your mind. So when I say, in Arabic, a ka'as that's full is called ka'sun dihaq. Okay? When I say that, because you can abstract a glass, you don't have to think of a particular glass. You have the concept of the glass in your mind, which is the one, the universal, the essence of a glass. And this is why human beings, by their nature, are muwahidun. We are always making one. This is why Adam, by his nature, is a muwahid. So tawheed is what we're doing as human beings. That's how we communicate, through tawheed. Because we're speaking about things that we've abstracted in our minds and made one. We've made the many one. And this is the highest form of tawheed, is to make the many gods one, because there's only one true God. All the other gods are false gods. That's why it's important. Between heart diseases, mental illnesses, waswasa to shaitan. Waswasa is Imam Zarruq said that waswasa was either a mental illness, which we call obsessive compulsive now, or he said it was jahl bis sunnah. If it's something where you have compulsive behavior and you can't stop it, then it's a mental illness, and it should be treated as such. If you're like doing your wudu over and over again because you don't know if you have doubt, then your muwaswas has a different hukm from other people. So if you're somebody that has doubt all the time, you have a different hukm. And so you don't have to repeat things. So where does the decision we make come out from? And who does it physically, or where does it physically or metaphysically manifest? Irada is the will works with the intellect. The will is a faculty that enables you to do things. Irada, yuridu shay'an. And it's an attribute of God, irada. Is it okay to read translations of the Ihya? I think I answered that one. Are these other ones here? With so many corrupt leaders, is there any point in Muslims voting? Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya says that if you're living in Western countries, then you should take lesser of 2 evils. So it depends. In terms of national races, in most of these countries they're not affected, but local government can affect. You can actually get gambling outlawed in local districts and things like that. There's things that people can do. We have strict rules of engagement in war. On what basis would it be fair to say that no Muslim society now can really engage in warfare, distant warfare, or nuclear warfare? Personally, I just think Muslims shouldn't. It's crazy. I once saw a cartoon, and in the first, it had these squares. And in the first one, it had like a British soldier with a gun fighting Muslims with swords, or French. So they obviously win, right? The next one, the Muslim had the gun, but the British had the machine gun. The next one, they had the machine guns, and the British had airplanes dropping bombs on them. And then the next one, the British had a tank. And then the next one, they had tanks, and the British had guns. And then in the next one, they had airplanes and guns and everything, and it showed a man in a nuclear room with his feet up on the desk with all the missiles in place to let them off. And this is the reality of the situation. Turkey, trust me, you saw how troubled that man was last night. That's the head of the AK party. He's an advisor to the president. You saw how disturbed he is by Palestine, right? I mean, that was genuine. You don't think they're troubled by it? And it's their next door neighbors. You think they can do anything about it without being toast? Seriously. I mean, be realistic. Muslims, it's crazy. We're in a crazy situation. For me, the best thing, if you want to be violent in Palestine, if you don't want to, just deal with the fact that you're helpless, you can't really fight a nuclear power with SAM missiles that were made in Russia, like why are they selling them to you? Seriously, why is Russia selling them to you? Because they're just playing a game. You're just a pawn in their game, right? Or your Kalashnikov. Why are they selling you Kalashnikovs? Muslims don't even produce their own weapons. So, okay, give us weapons so we can fight you, jihad. No, but seriously. To me, the best thing that you can do, if you want to be violent, use rocks. Seriously. Stop the missiles. I believe it. I'm against shooting those missiles. I think it's actually incurring more harm, it's wrong. It's just wrong. I really believe this in my heart of hearts. I believe this. I'm not saying this because I'm a quietist or because I'm a pacifist no. I am saying this because on moral grounds, I believe it is unethical to bring that kind of destruction on women and children. It's just wrong. The primary, the single most important thing in human beings is to defend their women and children. I mean, that's every man, that's what they want to do. And I understand the humiliation and degradation that's going on. Trust me, I understand it and I get it, and I get the impulses and I understand that. But we've been using these strategies as a community, as an ummah, for 100 years. And things, to me, they're worse than they've ever been. So for me, it's just like, I don't know. I think, let's try some other strategies. David and Goliath. David, alayhi salam, Jewish prophet, right? When he went up against Jalut, and this is in our tafsirs, but the Quran has the story, right? Talut was Saul, and he was the commander. Jalut was this giant, like 7'5" or something like that, huge, had his weapons, spear, sword, all this armor. And they didn't have anybody amongst the Israelites. They said, "La taqata lana bi Jalut wa junudih." We have no ability to fight Jalut and his army. We can't do it, right? What did the people with who ظنوا أنهم ملاقوا الله, what did they say? كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. How many a small group defeated a big group by the permission of God? How did David defeat him? He was a shepherd. He wore shepherd's clothes. He had a sling, and he used to kill wolves. So he became very good at hitting moving targets. He would just shoot them, and that was like a very powerful weapon. But it wasn't used in warfare. So when he came and he told Saul, "I'll go fight Goliath," all the Jews that were there, they laughed at him. This is this little shepherd kid. Give us a break. He said, "Well, nobody else wants to do it, so let's let him have a go at it." So they dressed him in all this armor, and they put him on the best horse. They gave him a sword, a spear. So he's riding out there to meet Jalut on his own terms. He's meeting him on his own terms. But superior power. He turns around. This is in the tafsir. He turns around, and all the Jewish soldiers, they say to Saul, Jabun al-Fata, he's afraid. He gets back, he says, listen, I can't fight like this. I need to take all this stuff off. Takes all the armor off. I don't need the horse. Just give me my slingshot. And he goes out there, and now Goliath is like looking at this little, skinny little shepherd with his shepherd clothes and a slingshot. What is this? And he just, right between the eyes, drops dead. That's thinking differently. Do you remember, seriously, when I was in America, when they showed those Palestinians throwing rocks at the tanks, look what happened when that Chinese guy just stood in front of the tanks. How much sympathy that brought. All you're doing is giving them an excuse to squelch you. Because even the worst of people in America, if they were being oppressed and bombed and these things happening and they weren't fighting back, even the worst people would say that's not fair. It's not fair. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not making judgments on people. I'm not in their situation, and I pray for their safety and that Allah gives us, elevates our state and our status and restores us to what we had before. That's my hope. But like I said, I'm not judging people. I'm not. I'm just strategically, I'm a strategic thinker. I'm not a tactician. There's a difference between strategy and tactics. I think long term. I don't think short term tactical stuff. It's because I played football, not soccer, Soccer, you just run around, never think. They don't have a timeout. That's what the whole third world. You just play soccer, never think, never stop. Maybe we should do something different. We're getting beat. You just keep playing. In football, you stop every play and reassess. If you've ever been in a huddle, quarterback's like, what are you doing over there? Stop, block those guys over there. Hey, you do, right? We need different strategy. Yeah. Can we complain to God about our problems? Absolutely, we should. We shouldn't complain to people. Nobody likes to hear your problems. But God loves to hear our problems. In fact, there's a hadith that God will not alleviate the tribulation because he loves to hear the people calling on him. You mentioned how even Imam Al-Ghazali felt the corrupting power of influence. What lessons can someone in a position of power learn from his life, particularly in relation to political power? Political power is very dangerous. That's why I'm a monarchist. I really think monarchy is, in the absence of a khalifa, that's what we got. And that's the next best thing. In the absence of a khilafa, the next best thing was a monarchy. So I think monarchs are, it's much better to have somebody who's raised from the time they're little, understand they're going to be in power. They get everything they want. You can't corrupt a king. You cannot corrupt a king. You can corrupt a Democrat very easily. You can't corrupt a king. A king's either corrupt by nature or he's not. But you can't corrupt him. But you can corrupt a Democrat. We said that seeking knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim. What does the word knowledge mean here? We're going to get, that's the whole book, is explaining what knowledge is. So we'll get there, inshallah. Also, how should we seek knowledge? He's also going to talk about that and what type of knowledge you should seek. What compass can be used to distinguish between good knowledge and bad knowledge? He's going to do that also. And tafakkur, what is it? He'll talk about that too. So we'll get there, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. You said that one should avoid what is harmful before one does doing good. Does not good deeds turn into more good deeds? No, it's not. They're not mutually exclusive, that idea. But the point is that the first priority is self-preservation. You know, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first thing, you have to get your security down. If you don't have that, you can't do anything. So, but it doesn't, I mean, we do good, but most important thing is avoiding harm, which is why the Prophet ﷺ, that's a priority in his religion, is the avoidance of harm. So you avoid harmful things. And then you do what you can from the good things. Right? Because the Prophet said, إِذَا نَهِيتُكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. Right? But وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. You know, do what you're able to do. Right? So the istita'a, I mean, good is endless. Right? But the harmful things for you, there's lots of good things that you could do, but the harmful things, you have to avoid them. I know, that's a good point. So he's saying that Imam Al-Ghazali, in the Aqidah class, they were saying, or Tasawwuf, Tazkiyah class, they were saying you shouldn't expose your faults, whereas Imam Al-Ghazali does. That, generally, sitr is the basis. Imam Al-Ghazali, though, was really trying to help people that were afflicted. It's like somebody who was known to be an alcoholic, and he goes around telling people how bad it is and what it did to me. So they're like a witness, right? Or somebody who was in prison. Like Malcolm used to talk about that. It was known that he was in prison. It was said on national TV. So that was a benefit for people that are similar to him. So Imam Al-Ghazali was known to be arrogant. He was known to be, those things were known by people. And so he was saying, I know these things because I had them. And in that way, so it's... Mm-hmm.
I just want to clarify. You mentioned how amongst the two quwwa, they have virtues if they're arbitrated by their aql. And then you mentioned hatred, pain, and fear.
Right.
Is that quwwa ghadabiyya or?
No, that's still in the shahwa. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the quwwa ghadabiyya also has, it has these capacities also. In terms of goods, right, it's really not applicable. So you don't because it doesn't, it's really about warding off harm. But the virtues that it has the virtue of ghadab, which is anger. So, and anger is towards it's towards evil. You know, it's angry at any wrongs or injustices. Right? But the second one then is shaja'a, or courage. And shaja'a is in the presence of a harm that it knows it can overcome. So it's not courage. It's not courage to commit suicide. That's actually tahawwur. It's not courage to run into a group and just get killed if you know you're going to die. It's not courage. It's actually it's the extreme. Courage is the mean between cowardice and foolhardiness. So it's actually foolhardy. The Prophet ﷺ, his religion didn't have people that committed suicide. And people who say, oh, what about the Sahabi that was flung over the wall he covered himself with pillows. And he actually survived. He opened the gate. Now, he could have died, and that's courage, because anytime you go into battle, you could die. So that's courage. But the idea that you're absolutely going to die, no. And there's some of the fatwa are about what's called inghimas fil adu, which is to throw yourself into the enemy knowing that you're going to die in order to save another group of people. In those situations, the ulama considered it permissible, and there are Khalid ibn Walid took a group, and even the Americans, if you look at the highest decoration that they give, it's usually given to people that sacrifice themselves for others. Like jumped on a grenade and blew themselves up to save the other men in the platoon, right? So even they acknowledge that. So that's a different thing. when you're not saving people, when you're not, there's no benefit to it other than to say, well, you can't kill my spirit. Like, we'll show you, we can stand up to this thing. And that's why traditionally, when suicide bombing first showed up, it didn't show up from the Muslims. It was a bid'ah that came out of it's a kamikaze tradition. The Japanese used it. It was also a sakurai. It originally came from Jewish zealots that were called the sakurai. The hashashin practiced it. But when it originally came up, all the ulama prohibited it. They really, if you read the early fatwas, they were all against it. But over time, like the satellite dish, when it first showed up, they said it was haram. When the photograph first showed up, they said it was haram. Everybody starts using it. Ammat al-balwa. The ulama kind of said, well, okay, as long as you only use it for good. Anyway, all right. You know, I'm going to tell you something, and I really mean this. In terms of knowledge, you know, if you ask me, qama zaydun wa qa'da amrun, and you ask me, what's qa'da there? And I say it's a fi'al, and it's madi, and it's mabni ala al-fath. You know, what's zaydun? Zaydun is fa'ilun, it's marfu'. You know, it's a grammar, it's a science, I studied it. You know, and if you're studying grammar with me, I might make a mistake. I'm not a master of grammar by any means, but I did study Arabic grammar, and I can read pretty well. So, you know, if you're studying grammar with me, you should trust me on that. Right? If you're going to study with me, I mean, if you find somebody, there's a lot of people far more knowledgeable than me in grammar, better to study with. Or if you study a book of fiqh that I studied and I can teach, you know. In terms of dealing with what's going on right now, I'm just thinking, I don't know. I really mean this. I don't know. And I wish I could say something definitive to all of you and say, you know, here's the reality. I'm just saying, I've thought a lot about this stuff. These are my conclusions. Take them or leave them. Seriously. I'm not a khalifa. I'm not, you know, I'm a talib ilm. I don't even consider myself alim. I am talibu ilman, right? So, if it makes sense, that's fine. If it doesn't make sense, that's fine. But this hatred of people for using their intellects to the best of their ability, this idea somehow that, you know, oh, you know, what's this? This is a sellout. What are you talking about? We don't do that. We don't do that. No, I don't know. I'm just telling you these are my conclusions. That's all. But all this hatred in our ummah and our community for dissension, everybody has to, you know, zig heil. It's like everybody has to just toe the party line, do what everybody else says, follow. And if you don't, if you just deviate from the common thread that everybody seems to be attached to, that personally I think has really brought a lot of tribulation and despair onto this community, I don't know. So that's all I can tell you. I really don't. I swear to God, I've just wanted to get out. I want to go into uzla, just get out of this whole thing because it's just madness. I just feel like you can't even speak anymore without just everybody just jumping on you. And it's like, what? And then I'm really curious about just converts. Like, it's like I converted to this religion. You know, you'd think people would be a little happy that somebody converted to a religion. You know, hey, he's on our side. You know, no, he's not on our side. Because he doesn't agree with all of the things that we say that we should be doing today. Even though he accepts the religion, he accepts the Quran, he accepts the Hadith, but he doesn't accept my way of thinking about the Quran or the Hadith, and therefore he's evil. That's really strange. I find it really strange. I mean, so many converts are alienated from this religion. I'm speaking from, I'll give you one example. I know a lady who she just converted, and she had people over for iftar, and she made a little sweet by hand. You know, most people just go now to the store and buy some cake, but no, she took the time to make this pie, and then she serves the pie, and one of the guests that were there was, is there vanilla in that? And she said, yes. So what's he do? He goes and literally dumped it in the garbage. Like what is that? What's happened to people? Just basic humanity, just basic decency. It's really strange, but if you want to know why so many Muslims, in America, it's like everybody, it's like 20% now. Did you see that? It was 50% a few years ago. Now on these polls, like there's only 20% that have a favorable opinion of Muslims. So you're talking to 80% of the people don't like us and don't want us there. That's not a very good situation. And then we've got Muslims dancing about being happy like a house without a roof. I don't know what the hell you're happy about, man. I have no idea. Yeah, I wanted to actually do a video that showed all of them dancing and then showed the Palestinians and the Syrians and the Iraqis and just end it by saying, the field Negroes are happy that the house Negroes are happy. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير.